The Magellan Expedition. Led by the Portuguese explorer Ferdinand Magellan under the Spanish crown, a groundbreaking voyage that marked the first circumnavigation of the globe from 1519 to 1522. They set out to find a western sea route to the Spice Islands of Indonesia, proving in the process that the Earth is round and that the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans were indeed connected. Magellan himself did not complete the entire journey, as he was killed in the Philippines at the Battle of Mactan in 1521. However, the expedition, under the command of Juan Sebastian Elcano, successfully returned to Spain in 1522, albeit with only 18 of the original 270 crew members aboard the last remaining ship, thus completing the first known voyage around the entire Earth and dramatically expanding the understanding of the world's geography. Hello and welcome to the channel. If it's your first time here, it's great to meet you, and if you're coming back, good to see you again. If you want to support the channel, you're already doing the right thing, but a like, comment and subscribe certainly goes a long way. Those who want to go above and beyond may refer to the links in the description of this video. Now, with that being said, let us all get nice and relaxed, and we can begin. Christopher Columbus embarked on a series of voyages to the west between 1492 and 1503, driven by the ambition to establish direct trade routes between Spain and the lucrative markets of the Asian kingdoms, particularly aiming to reach the fabled Indies. However, the explorations led by Columbus revealed that the newly discovered lands of the Americas were indeed distinct from Asia, constituting an entirely separate continent. This realization prompted geopolitical negotiations, culminating in the 1494 Treaty of Tordesillas, which effectively allocated the eastern exploration routes to Portugal. Consequently, Portugal, under the leadership of Vasco da Gama, successfully navigated around Africa and reached India in 1498. Meanwhile, the Kingdom of Castile, later unified with the Kingdom of Aragon to form Spain, recognized the economic significance of establishing alternative trade routes to Asia, given the lucrative nature of the spice trade. This urgency was underscored by the Junta de Toro Conference in 1505, during which the Spanish crown authorized expeditions to explore potential western passages to Asia. This directive led to various exploratory ventures, including Vasco Núñez de Balboa's historic crossing of the Isthmus of Panama in 1513, making him the first European to gaze upon the vast expanse of the great Pacific Ocean. Tragically, Juan Diaz de Solís met his demise in 1516 while exploring the Rio de la Plata region of South America under the sponsorship of Spain. The genesis of Ferdinand Magellan's expedition to the Spice Islands, also called the Moluccas, in the early 16th century, is intertwined with his prior experiences as a Portuguese sailor and a career as a formidable soldier to match. Magellan's acquaintance with Francisco Serrao, who participated in the first Portuguese expedition to the Moluccas in 1511, proved to be a pivotal factor. Serrao's first-hand accounts of the richness and allure of the Spice Islands deeply captivated Magellan's imagination, thus igniting his determination to organize an expedition to these mysterious and distant lands. Historians speculate about Magellan's persistent appeals to King Manuel I of Portugal for financial backing, likely commencing around 1514. However, the historical records regarding these petitions remain ambiguous. Notably, King Manuel consistently rebuffed Magellan's request for a salary increase, prompting Magellan to seek permission to offer his services to another monarch. This decision ultimately led to his collaboration with the cosmographer Ruy Faliero, who shared his grievances against King Manuel. Together, Magellan and Faliero devised a plan to propose their ambitious expedition to the King of Spain. Thus, in 1517, Magellan and Faliero made the significant decision to relocate to Seville, signaling their intent to seek sponsorship from the Spanish monarchy. This relocation marked the beginning of a new chapter in their quest to find a western passage to the Spice Islands, and set the stage for one of the most renowned maritime expeditions in all history. Upon their arrival in Seville, Magellan wasted no time in contacting Juan de Aranda, the factor of the Casa de Contratación. With the subsequent arrival of his partner Faliero, and under supportive guidance of Aranda, they presented their ambitious project to King Charles I of Spain, who, by the way, would later become the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V. But that's for a different video, isn't it? Magellan's vision, if realized, would fulfill Columbus's original plan of establishing a westward spice route without straining any relations with Portugal. This concept resonated with the prevailing sentiments of the era, and had been previously discussed following Vasco Núñez de Balboa's momentous discovery of the Pacific Ocean. On March 22nd, 1518, King Charles appointed Magellan and Faliero as captains, and granted them the authority to embark on their expedition in search of the Spice Islands by July of that year. Additionally, the monarch elevated them to the esteemed rank of Commander of the Order of Santiago. The agreement reached with King Charles encompassed several key provisions: exclusive monopoly on the newly discovered route for a period of 10 years, a fifth of the share of profits generated from the expedition, appointment as governors of the lands and islands discovered, with an entitlement of 5% of the resultant net gains to be inherited by their partners or heirs, permission to transport goods worth 1,000 ducats annually from the Moluccas to Spain, exempt from most taxes, and, in the event of discovering more than 6 islands, a 15th of the trading profits from 2 islands of their choosing, and a 25th from the others. Pretty good deal, right? While the financing of the expedition predominantly relied on support from the Spanish crown, which provided ships stocked with supplies for a 2-year voyage. However, despite the king's initial commitment to fund the fleet, his financial difficulties led him to seek assistance from the House of Fugger. Through the intermediary of Archbishop Juan Rodriguez de Fonseca, who headed the Casa de Contratación. The crown secured the involvement of the merchant Cristobal de Haro, who contributed a quarter of the necessary funds and supplies for barter. The expedition's preparation, well, that was not without its own challenges. Financial constraint, opposition from the King of Portugal, suspicion towards Magellan and other Portuguese members among the Spanish, and the complex personality of Valero all posed significant hurdles. Nonetheless, the involvement of expert cartographers, such as Jorge Reynel and Diego Ribeiro, the latter being a Portuguese employed by King Charles since 1518, facilitated the development of crucial maps for the voyage. Despite these obstacles, Magellan and his team persevered, driven by their unwavering determination to navigate the uncharted waters and unlock the mystery and riches of the distant lands. The fleet assembled for the expedition, known as the Armada del Maluco, in reference to the Indonesian name for the islands they were trying to reach, comprised 5 ships, provisioned for a 2-year-long journey. These vessels, predominantly blackened by tar by covering most of their surfaces, represented a substantial investment, as indicated by the official accounting of the expedition, which totaled over 8 million maravedis, encompassing the costs of the ships, provisions, and of course the salaries of the crews. Provisioning the fleet was a crucial undertaking, with food accounting for a significant portion of the expense, totaling over 1.2 million maravedis, nearly equaling the cost of the ships themselves. The bulk of the food supply consisted of wine and hardtack. Hardtack's a kind of dried up biscuit kind of thing. It's terrible. Well, that was 4/5 of the provisions, so definitely not much variety. Additional provisions included flour, salted meat, and livestock such as 7 cows and 3 pigs. The ships also carried a variety of other foodstuffs, including cheese, almonds, mustard, figs, and carne de membrillo, which was a delicacy popular at the time, made from preserved quince, that may have inadvertently contributed to preventing scurvy among the crew. The fleet initially comprised of 5 carrack ships, with the Trinidad serving as the flagship. However, details of the ship's configuration remain unknown due to the absence of contemporary illustrations. The Casa de Contratación's official records indicate that the ship's cost amounted to 1.3 million maravedis, with an additional 1.3 million allocated for outfitting and various transportation expenses. Each of the 5 ships was commanded by a designated captain and carried a crew of varying sizes. The Trinidad, captained by Ferdinand Magellan, with a crew initially numbered 62, later reduced to 61, departed Seville on August 10, 1519. The ship encountered mechanical issues in the Moluccas and ultimately broke down in December 1521. The San Antonio, led by Juan de Cartagena, with a crew of 55, deserted in the Strait of Magellan in the November of 1520 and returned to Spain in May of 1521. Conception, commanded by Gaspar de Quesada, with a crew of 44 later increased to 45, scuttled in the Philippines in the May of 1521. And the Santiago, under the leadership of João Serrao, with a crew of 31 initially, later augmented to 33, wrecked in a storm at the Santa Cruz River on May 22, 1520. The Victoria, initially captained by Luis Mendoza, with a crew of 45, later expanded to 46, successfully completed the circumnavigation under the command of Juan Sebastian Elcano, returning to Spain in September of 1522. Mendoza was killed during a mutiny attempt. The crew assembled for Magellan's expedition consisted of approximately 270 men, and pretty much all of them were Spaniards. Initially, Spanish authorities harbored suspicions towards Magellan, nearly obstructing his voyage by insisting on replacing his predominantly Portuguese crew with Spanish sailors. Ultimately, the crew comprised about 40 Portuguese individuals, including notable figures such as Magellan's brother-in-law Duarte Barbosa, João Serrao, Estevão Gomez, and Magellan's indentured servant Enrique of Malacca. Additionally, the crew boasted a diverse array of nationalities, with recorded numbers hailing from various countries, including 29 Italians, 17 French, and a smaller contingent of Flemish, Greek, Irish, English, and Asian sailors. Among the Spanish contingent were at least 29 Basques, including Juan Sebastian Elcano, some of whom were not fluent in Spanish. Rui Falero, initially designated as co-captain alongside Magellan, encountered mental health issues prior to departure, although some sources suggest he opted to remain behind after predicting through horoscope readings that the voyage would be fatal for him. Others indicate his removal from the expedition due to his mental condition. Consequently, Juan de Cartagena assumed the role of joint commander, while André de San Martin replaced Falero as the fleet's cosmographer and astrologer. Elcano, a Spanish merchant ship captain based in Seville, sought the king's pardon for past transgressions and joined the expedition. Antonio Picafetta, an esteemed Venetian scholar and traveler, requested to accompany the voyage, assuming the title of supernumerary and receiving a modest salary. Picafetta became a close assistant to Magellan, meticulously documenting the journey in this journal. Another crew member, Francisco Albo, maintained a formal nautical logbook throughout the voyage. On August 10, 1519, Magellan's fleet, comprising of the aforementioned 5 ships, departed Seville and navigated down the Guadalquivir River to reach Sanlúcar de Barrameda at the river's mouth. Here they remained for over 5 weeks, before finally setting sail on September 20th, 1519, embarking on their journey from Spain. Shortly after departing, on September 26th, the fleet made a stop at Tenerife in the Canary Islands to replenish their supplies. Among the items acquired were vegetables and pitch, which were more cost-effective to procure on the island rather than back home in Spain. During this stopover, Magellan received a clandestine message from his father-in-law, Diego Barbosa, warning him of an imminent mutiny being plotted by certain Castilian captains, with Juan de Cartagena, captain of the San Antonio, identified as the ringleader. Additionally, Magellan learned of the Portuguese king's dispatching of 2 fleets of caravels to apprehend him. On October the 3rd, the fleet resumed its journey, sailing south along the African coast. Disagreements arose regarding the course direction, with Cartagena advocating for a more westerly route. In a strategic move to evade pursuit by the Portuguese caravels, Magellan chose to follow the African coastline, deviating from the traditional route. As the Armada approached the equator towards the end of October, they encountered a series of fierce storms, characterized by intense squalls that forced them to take down their sails at times. Pigafetta noted the appearance of St. Elmo's fire during these storms, which served as a comforting omen for the crew amidst the chaotic weather conditions. While following the 2 weeks of turbulent weather, the fleet encountered a period of calm in the equatorial waters before being propelled westward by the south equatorial current, ultimately reaching the vicinity of the trade winds. Now, during this ocean crossing, a sodomy trial took place aboard the Victoria, involving the ship's Sicilian master, Salomon Anton, and a Genoese apprentice sailor, Antonio Varese. Now, at the time, homosexuality was punishable by death in Spain, and upon being found guilty, Anton was executed by strangulation on December the 20th, 1519, upon the fleet's arrival to Brazil. Varese, on the other hand, met his demise by drowning after being thrown overboard on April 27th, 1520. Following the trial, a confrontation occurred among Magellan's captives, led by Cartagena, who accused Magellan of jeopardizing the fleet's safety by choosing the African coast route. Despite tensions running high, Magellan managed to maintain control and subdue the mutinous actions, opting to relieve Cartagena of his command rather than sentencing him to death, as urged by some of his advisors. Antonio de Coca replaced Cartagena as the captain of the San Antonio, restoring a semblance of order within the fleet amidst the challenging circumstances. By the 29th of November, the fleet had reached the approximate latitude of Cape St. Augustine, marking their arrival at the Brazilian coastline, which Pigafetta refers to as Verzin in his diary, deriving from the Italian term for Brazilwood. This region had been familiar to both Spanish and Portuguese explorers since around 1500, with European powers, in particular Portugal, exploiting its valuable Brazilwood resources. Equipped with a map of the Brazilian coastline, known as the Livro de Marinaria, and aided by João Lopes Carvalho, the pilot of the Conception who possessed prior experience in Rio de Janeiro, the fleet navigated towards their destination. On December the 13th, the fleet reached Rio de Janeiro, though it lacked any permanent Portuguese settlement at the time. Noticing the absence of Portuguese ships in the harbor, Magellan deemed it safe to make a stop. Pigafetta noted a fortuitous weather event upon their arrival, as rain began to fall after a prolonged dry spell. This coincidence led the indigenous people to believe that the fleet had brought rain from heaven, fostering a warm reception and facilitating their conversion to the Christian faith. The fleet spent 13 days in Rio, during which they undertook ship repairs and replenished their supplies of water and food, including yam, cassava, and pineapple. They also engaged in trade with the locals, exchanging trinkets such as mirrors, combs, knives, and bells for food, and local goods like parrot feathers. Additionally, the crew discovered they could procure favors from the native women. Historian Ian Cameron characterized this period in Rio as a saturnalia of feasting and lovemaking, reflecting the relaxed atmosphere and indulgent activities enjoyed by the crew. On December 27th, the fleet bid farewell to Rio de Janeiro, with Picafetta noting the disappointment of the natives, who attempted to persuade them to stay by following in canoes. Sailing south along the South American coast, the fleet aimed to locate El Paso, the mythical strait believed to offer passage through South America to the Spice Islands. On the 11th of January, they encountered a headland marked by 3 hills, which they mistook for Cape Santa Maria. Venturing around the headland, they encountered a vast body of water extending westward, leading Magellan to believe they had indeed found El Paso. However, it was later revealed to be the Rio de la Plata. Magellan dispatched the Santiago under Juan Serrano's command to explore the perceived strait, while the other ships continued southward in search of Terra Australis, the southern continent believed to exist south of South America. However, they failed to find the southern continent, and upon regrouping with the Santiago, Serrano reported that the supposed strait was, in fact, simply a river mouth. Magellan, initially incredulous, led the fleet back through the area, confirming Serrano's observation when they encountered fresh water. Continuing their quest for the strait, the fleet pressed southward along the coast on February the 3rd. Despite Magellan's belief that they would soon find the strait, or the southern terminus of the continent, they sailed for another 8 long weeks, without any success, facing the challenges of shallow waters, squalls, storms, and dropping temperatures as the winter approached. Conditions grew increasingly dire by late March. Magellan decided to seek refuge for the winter. On March 31st, a break in the coast led them to Point St. Julian, a natural harbor where they anchored. There they spent 5 months waiting out the harsh winter before resuming their search for the elusive strait. Upon landing at San Julian, another mutiny attempt unfolded within the course of a day, orchestrated by Juan de Cartagena, Gaspar de Quesada, and Luis Mendoza, former captains of the San Antonio, Conception, and Victoria respectively. The mutineers, dissatisfied with Magellan's leadership, accused him of endangering the fleet. Unlike the previous incident during the Atlantic crossing, this mutiny was quite a bit more calculated. In the early hours of Easter Sunday, on the 1st of April, Cartagena and Quesada led 30 armed men, their faces masked with charcoal, onto the San Antonio. They attacked Alvaro de Mesquita, the ship's newly appointed captain and Magellan's cousin, who resisted alongside Juan de Eloriaga, the boatswain. Quesada fatally wounded Eloriaga in the ensuing struggle. With the San Antonio now under their control, the mutineers now commanded 3 of the fleet's 5 ships, with only the Santiago and the Trinidad, led by Magellan, remaining loyal. Although the mutineers aimed the San Antonio's cannons at the Trinidad, they made no further aggressive moves that night. The following morning, April 2nd, as the mutineers consolidated their position on the San Antonio and the Victoria, a group of sailors inadvertently drifted towards the Trinidad. Magellan seized the opportunity to gather intelligence on the mutineers' plans. Launching a counter-offensive, Magellan devised a clever strategy. Disguised marines boarded the Victoria, while his alguacil, Gonzalo de Espinosa, approached the ship under the guise of delivering a confidential message. It was then when Espinosa fatally stabbed Mendoza, the captain of the Victoria, and the disguised marines provided reinforcement. Quickly realizing they were outmatched, the remaining mutineers surrendered. Cartagena pleaded for mercy, while Quesada attempted to flee, but was apprehended by local sailors who had severed the San Antonio's cables, causing it to drift towards the Trinidad. Ultimately, the mutiny was quelled, and Magellan's authority was well and truly reaffirmed. The trial of the mutineers, presided over by Magellan's cousin, Alvaro de Mesquita, lasted 5 days. On the 7th of April, Gaspar de Quesada was executed by beheading, carried out by his foster brother and secretary, Luis Molina, in exchange for clemency. Quesada and Mendoza's bodies were then quartered and displayed on gibbets for 3 months. Andres de San Martin, suspected of complicity in the mutiny, endured torture by Strapado, but was ultimately allowed to continue serving as cosmographer. By the way, Strapado, that's from the Inquisition's playbook. What they would do is they would tie your hands behind your back and then hoist you up on this large rope so that your arms behind your back would contort and twist and dislocate. Then they would violently pull the rope back and forth. It's pretty terrible. Well, Juan de Cartagena and the priest Pedro Sanchez de Reina were sentenced to be marooned. That's when you just leave somebody on an island somewhere. On August 11th, 2 weeks prior to the fleet's departure from St. Julian, they were left on a small nearby island to perish. Over 40 other conspirators, including Juan Sebastian Elcano, were shackled and tasked with laborious ship maintenance throughout the winter. In late April, Magellan dispatched the Santiago, led by Juan Serrano, to scout southward for a strait. They reached the estuary of a river called Santa Cruz on May the 3rd, where they found shelter and abundant resources. However, upon attempting to return to St. Julian on the 22nd of May, the Santiago was caught in a storm and ran aground. Most of the crew managed to reach the shore before the ship capsized. 2 men journeyed on foot to St. Julian for help, while the others survived on shellfish and local vegetation until rescued by a party sent forth from St. Julian. Upon learning of the favorable conditions at Santa Cruz, Magellan relocated the fleet there for the remainder of the austral winter. Departing St. Julian around the 24th of August, they spent 6 weeks at Santa Cruz before continuing their quest for the strait. October the 18th, 1520, the fleet left Santa Cruz and resumed its southward journey in search of a passage. Just 3 days later, on October the 21st, they sighted a headland approximately 52 degrees south latitude, which they named Cape Vergennes. Beyond the cape, they discovered a vast bay, and while exploring this bay, a storm suddenly struck. The Trinidad and Victoria managed to navigate out to open seas, but the Conception and the San Antonio were pushed deeper into the bay towards a promontory. After 3 days, the fleet managed to reunite, and the Conception and San Antonio reported being drawn through a narrow passage not visible from the sea, which extended for some distance. Hoping that they had finally discovered the sought-after strait, the fleet followed the path taken by the Conception and San Antonio. Unlike at Rio de la Plata earlier, the water did not lose its salinity as they progressed, and surroundings indicated consistently deep waters. This was indeed the passage they sought, which would later become known as the Strait of Magellan. Well, at the time they didn't call it the Strait of Magellan, that was a bit later. They used to call it, and this is what Magellan dubbed it, the All Saints Channel, because the fleet passed through it on November the 1st, which is actually All Saints' Day. Well, by October the 28th, the fleet had reached an island within the strait, likely Isabel Island or perhaps Dawson Island, which could be navigated in 2 directions. Magellan instructed the fleet to split up to explore both parts. They intended to regroup within a few days, but the San Antonio never rejoined them. While waiting for the San Antonio, Gonzalo de Espinosa led a small ship to explore the furthest reaches of the strait. After 3 days, they reached the end of the strait and the mouth of the Pacific Ocean. 3 more days passed before Espinosa finally returned. Picafetta recounts that upon hearing Espinosa's discovery, Magellan wept tears of joy. The fleet's remaining 3 ships completed the passage to the Pacific by November 28th, after weeks of fruitless searching for the San Antonio. Magellan named the waters the Mar Pacifico, or Pacific Ocean, because of the serene and calm nature of the sea, especially in contrast to the challenging straits. The San Antonio's failure to reunite with Magellan's fleet in the strait marked a significant setback for the expedition. Instead, the ship reversed course and sailed back to Spain. The officers of the San Antonio claimed they arrived early at the rendezvous point, but there is uncertainty regarding the truth of this assertion. Alvaro de Mesquita, the ship's pilot and Magellan's cousin, attempted to rejoin the fleet by firing cannons and setting off smoke signals. However, he was overpowered in another mutiny, orchestrated by one Esteval Gomez, the ship's pilot who harbored animosity towards Magellan. Gomez argued for a return to Spain to gather more supplies, contrary to Magellan's plan to continue to the Moluccas. The San Antonio did eventually reach Seville on the 8th of May 1521, with only 55 of its crew members remaining. Upon their return, there was a 6-month trial of the San Antonio's crew. Despite Mesquita's loyalty to Magellan, the majority of the testimony portrayed Magellan in a negative light, justifying the mutiny at San Julian by alleging that Magellan had tortured Spanish sailors. These claims tarnished Magellan's reputation, and led to repercussions for his family. Mosquito endured a year of imprisonment following the trial, while Magellan's wife, Beatrice, faced financial difficulties and was thus placed under house arrest along with her son. Magellan's lack of understanding regarding the vastness of the Pacific Ocean led to significant challenges for the expedition. Although, let's be fair, no one really understood the vastness of the Pacific Ocean in those days. Well, initially expecting a short journey of 3 or 4 days, the fleet spent over 3 months at sea before reaching Guam and then the Philippines. Initially sailing north along the coast of Chile, they later altered their course to west-northwest by mid-December. Their route across the Pacific was unfortunate, as they missed encountering several islands that could have provided fresh food and water. Instead, they only sighted 2 small uninhabited islands, which they named the Islas Infortunadas, the Unfortunate Islands. The conditions on board, of course, were dire, with inadequate food and hardly any water left. Much of their seal meat had gone off due to the equatorial heat, and they resorted to eating old infested biscuits and drinking foul-smelling water. The journey across the Pacific was further compounded by the onset of scurvy among the crew, a disease whose cause was not really understood at the time. Picafetta reported that many men fell ill, and 19 actually died during the crossing. Magellan and other officers, however, remained unaffected, possibly due to their consumption of preserved quince, which contained more than enough vitamin C. On the 6th of March 1521, the fleet reached the Mariana Islands, likely spotting the island of Rota first, but unable to land there. They anchored on Guam 30 hours later, where they encountered native Chamorro people in proas, a type of outrigger canoe that was unfamiliar to Europeans. The Chamorros boarded the ships, taking rigging, knives, and iron items. A physical confrontation ensued, resulting in the death of at least one of the Chamorro. The remaining natives fled with the goods, including Magellan's bergantina. In retaliation, Magellan sent a raiding party ashore the next day, looting and burning Chamorro houses and killing 7 of them. They recovered the bergantina and departed Guam on the 9th of March, continuing westward. Arriving in the Philippines on the 16th of March, the fleet made first contact with Samar before landing on Homonhon, an uninhabited island. There they encountered friendly locals from Suluan, traded supplies, and rested for nearly 2 weeks. On the 27th of March, they left Homonhon and, the next day, approached Limasawa. Natives in canoes alerted the Balangay warships of local rulers from Mindanao on a hunting expedition. Magellan's slave, Enrique of Malacca, communicated with the natives in Malay for the first time, indicating familiar territory. They exchanged gifts, and Magellan met Raja Colombo and Raja Siawi, later becoming blood brothers with Colombo in a local ritual. The Rajas displayed golden ornaments and served food on golden plates, revealing the abundance of gold in Butuan and Calagan. The locals eagerly traded this gold for iron, impressed by Spanish armor and weaponry demonstrated by Magellan. On Sunday, the 31st of March, Easter Day, Magellan and 50 of his men landed on Limasaua to hold the first Catholic Mass in the Philippines, conducted by the Armada's chaplain. Local leaders, including Colambu and his brother, participated in the ceremony and expressed curiosity about the Catholic faith. After the Mass, Magellan's men erected a cross on the island's highest hill, formally claiming Limasaua and the entire Philippine archipelago as possessions of Spain. On the 2nd of April, Magellan convened a conference to determine their next move. While his officers advocated sailing southwest towards the Moluccas, Magellan opted to explore further into the Philippines. Setting sail on the 3rd of April, they were guided to Cebu by Colambu's men. Arriving on the 7th of April, Magellan negotiated with Raja Humabon, who typically demanded tribute from traders. Magellan persuaded him, with a good bit of charisma, to forego this requirement. Following the pattern in Limasaua, Magellan showcased his armada's weapons to impress the locals and taught them all about Catholicism. By the 14th of April, Humabon and his family were baptized, receiving an image of the Holy Child, later known as Santo Niño de Cebu. Over the following days, thousands of locals, including chiefs from nearby islands, embraced Christianity, totaling 2,200 conversions. Upon learning of resistance to Christian conversion on nearby Mactan Island led by Lapu-Lapu, Magellan ordered his men to do the Christian thing and burn down all of their homes. When this failed to deter them, he resolved to subdue them by more force, planning an armed expedition to Mactan. Thus Magellan assembled a force of 60 armed men to confront Lapu-Lapu's warriors. Although some Cebuano men accompanied Magellan, he instructed them not to engage in the battle, but to observe. Watch how the pros do it. Before the fighting began, Magellan sent an envoy to Lapu-Lapu, offering a chance to submit to the rule of the King of Spain and avoid any unnecessary bloodshed. But Lapu-Lapu refused. With 49 men, Magellan approached the shore, while 11 remained to guard the boats. Despite their superior armor and weaponry, Magellan's men were vastly outnumbered, with Picafetta estimating the enemy's strength at 1,500. The battle was fierce, and Magellan and several of his companions, including Cristobal Rebelo, Magellan's illegitimate son, were killed. This was, of course, quite devastating for the expedition. I mean, it's called the Magellan Expedition, and now there is no Magellan. Well, following his death, the surviving men had to get a new leader, so they held an election. Duarte Barbosa, Magellan's brother-in-law, and Juan Serrano were elected as co-commanders. However, tensions arose over the fate of Magellan's slave, Enrique. While Magellan's will called for Enrique's freedom, Barbosa and Serrano insisted that he continue to serve as an interpreter and be under their commands. Enrique's secret communications with Humabon led to his betrayal of the Spaniards. And no wonder. I don't really blame him after that. What a raw deal. On the 1st of May, Humabon invited the Europeans ashore for a feast, attended by around 30 men, mostly officers. Well, towards the end of the meal, when everybody was well and truly satiated, armed Cebuanos entered the hall and attacked the Europeans, killing 27 men, including Serrano and Barbosa. Serrano, the newly elected co-commander, was spared and brought to the shore to negotiate for ransom, but the Spanish ships departed, leaving his fate a little uncertain. Pigafetta suggests that João Carvalho, who assumed command in the absence of Barbosa and Serrano, may have abandoned Serrano to consolidate his power over the fleet. With just 115 survivors out of the 227 who had embarked from Seville, it became evident that the fleet lacked the manpower to operate 3 ships. Consequently, on the 2nd of May, the Conception was emptied and lit on fire. Carvalho assumed the role of the new Captain General, and the remaining 2 ships, the Trinidad and the Victoria, continued their journey through Southeast Asia in search of the Moluccas. Along the way they made stops at various islands, including Mindanao and Brunei, engaging in acts of piracy such as robbing a junk bound for China from the Moluccas. On the 21st of September, Carvalho was replaced as Captain General by Martin Mendez, with Gonzalo de Espinosa and Juan Sebastian Elcano taking command of the Trinidad and Victoria respectively. During their voyage, Elcano's crew faced an attack off the southeastern tip of Borneo by a Bruneian fleet commanded by a Luzon commander, likely Prince Arce of Manila. Despite the assault, Elcano managed to defeat and capture Arce. Eventually, Arce was released after a ransom was paid, but not before leaving a Spanish-speaking Moor named Pazaculan with Elcano's crew to assist them on their journey back home to Spain. The expedition finally reached the Spice Islands of the Moluccas on the 8th of November, landing on the island of Tidore, where they were warmly welcomed by the island's leader Al-Mansur. A trading post was established, and the men traded goods for cloves. However, around the 15th of December, as they attempted to set sail from Tidore with their cargo of cloves, the Trinidad was found to be taking on water due to disrepair. While attempts to repair the leak failed, it was decided that the Victoria would sail for Spain via a western route, while the Trinidad would remain behind to be refitted before attempting to return to Spain via an eastern route, involving an overland passage across the American continent. Unfortunately, Trinidad's attempt to return via the Pacific route was thwarted when it was captured by the Portuguese. Eventually, the ship was wrecked in a storm while under Portuguese control. The Victoria embarked on its journey home via the Indian Ocean route on the 21st of December 1521 under the command of Juan Sebastian Elcano. By the 6th of May 1522, the ship had rounded the Cape of Good Hope, but food shortages led to the death of 20 crew members from starvation by the 9th of July 1522. At that point, desperate for provisions, Elcano decided to put into Portuguese Cape Verde. To their surprise, upon arrival on 10th of July 1522, they discovered that their meticulous records were a day behind the actual date. The crew initially managed to make purchases by claiming they were returning to Spain from the Americas, but their subterfuge was discovered when Portuguese authorities found the Victoria was carrying spices from the East Indies. As a result, 13 crew members were detained. Despite the setback, the Victoria escaped with its precious cargo of 26 tons of spices, including cloves and cinnamon. On the 6th of September 1522, Elcano and the remaining crew of Magellan's expedition arrived in Sanlúcar de Barrameda, Spain, aboard the Victoria, almost precisely 3 years after they had set out. They then sailed upriver to Seville and proceeded overland to Valladolid, where they appeared before the Emperor as heroes. Well, that was a little bit more of an easier one to get through than the Christopher Columbus video. If you've watched the Christopher Columbus video, I'm sure you'll know what I mean. Go and watch it. Well, I'd like to thank my top-tier patrons, Stark Factory, JC, Jeffrey, Charles, and Britt. Thank you very much for supporting the channel, going above and beyond. And if you would like to do so, you know what to do. Check out the video description. But as always, the best way to support the channel is just to enjoy it. Thank you very much for listening, and I will see you in the next video, same time, same place, where the history never stops. Good night, everyone.